Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. I'm joined by Ash Sarkar. Keir Starmer said today that summer is over. We need to get ready for part 2 of his government. Are you depressed, excited about either of those developments?
I don't know about you, Michael, but when I was out there enjoying tinnies in the park, having a drink, all I could think of is, when will Darren Jones get a promotion? So I'm glad to see that my summer's ambition has been fulfilled.
If you came here tonight to watch us dissect Darren Jones' promotion, you'll be disappointed because we decided it's not very interesting. We will be talking about lots of things that hopefully you will find very interesting. And we've got an interview with journalist Jack Walton on his investigation on a Raise the Flag activist, so an anti-migrant activist, with prior convictions for illegally smuggling migrants. You couldn't make it up, and he hasn't. The evidence is very strong. We'll also talk about the summoned Flotilla, which is preparing an aid mission to Gaza with some Novara contributors on board. This summer, unfortunately, there's been only one political story that's dominated Britain's media: immigration. There have been frequent protests outside asylum hotels across the country, often infiltrated or started by violent far-right agitators. There have been rallies calling for mass deportations, and Reform UK ramping up the rhetoric around immigration. So it was only a matter of time before racist talk turned into racist violence. And this weekend, we saw actually quite a lot of it. This was the moment NHS nurse Apple Morehouse was racially abused and attacked while walking in Halifax Park with her 2 young daughters.
Yeah, what? You can't even speak English. And as for you, being
you can't even understand English.
Do you know what you are? That is what we call slavery. Because people like you are the only people that do a
Stop!
Where did you go? And I'm going to get you, and I'm going to make you really know I'm not. Where did you get that? Look.
No,
really?
I'm going to kill him. Well, you attack him.
Okay.
Hey,
Yeah, you did.
Have you got off a rubber boat?
Oh, you did.
Did you come across the channel?
I'm 15 years
Channel.
living in the UK. I'm British.
Channel.
No.
Ban the immigrant.
No. And he's a racist as well. Yeah? He's a
Ban the
racist.
immigrant.
So was he doing a Nazi salute? I'm not sure. In any case, what he was saying was very racist. You could hear him sort of repeating lots of the lines we've heard over the summer from politicians who should know better, whilst being racist and violent towards, well, she was being violent, wasn't she, towards those people. Now, the attack was allegedly precipitated by Morehouse, who has worked for the NHS for 12 years, asking the owners of that little dog you saw there to put it back on the lead after it chased her daughter. That's all it took, apparently, a simple civil-minded request to keep a dog under control. The man and woman allegedly behind the attack, believed to be in their 60s, have now been arrested on suspicion of racially aggravated assault. Meanwhile, outside a mosque in Portsmouth on Sunday, this happened.
You fuck right! If you get closer, I'll have to send myself. If you get closer. You want it? He's got a knife. Hey, exactly! He's got a knife. Get back, everyone. Yeah, exactly! No. But the thing is, what we've got to do is fucking protect our fucking children!
Take the knife from him, he will hit him.
If you're listening on the podcast, that video appears to show a possibly drunk white guy shouting at a small group of Muslim men, women and children outside a mosque. The white man then pulls out a knife and charges the other men, shouts, "This is what we've got to do to protect our children." Then he throws the knife, into some bushes. And I suppose remarkably after that, one of the Muslim guys manages to calm him down, sort of really gently walks him away, looks quite sort of like he's trying to compassionately diffuse the situation in a really, unpleasant, violent, dangerous. That looked incredibly scary to me. Now, according to reports, the man began the confrontation by shouting racial abuse at the families outside the mosque and telling them to, quote, go back where they came from. A 29-year-old man has now been arrested in connection with the attack. Meanwhile, in New York, a Chinese takeaway restaurant also came under attack. Now, on Friday, the Dragon House was covered in St. George's flags with the word Chinese painted over in red. Other graffiti included cat and dog over one window and England Geet Up. The side of the building was also sprayed with the message Go Home. I'm speaking to local media York Mix. The owner of the restaurant, who didn't want her name used, said this. This is heartbreaking for me, very sad. There are so many shops on Foxwood Lane, but only the Chinese takeaway was targeted. I have 3 children. They are growing up here and going to secondary school. England is my home. I don't know why people treat us like this. The owner has lived in the UK for 20 years and in York for a decade. There is a little bit of light in this particular story, though, too, after the local community were pretty quick to jump into action. So York company Crystal Clean Windows quickly turned up to remove the graffiti, cleaning the restaurant's windows and walls for free and getting rid of the hate-filled messages. Now, that racist graffiti was presumably done under the cover of darkness, but sometimes even the presence of cameras and multiple witnesses isn't enough to prevent aggressive racism. This is from a report on Nuneaton put out by Sky News this weekend. It begins with a journalist interviewing local businessman Zahin.
And how old are you?
32.
32.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah, no, we should. Can you not see we talking?
No, because you're going on about your religion and Christians, the true life, the way and the truth, mate. Jesus is the way, the truth and the life. That's the issue we have with using in our country. You got to use raping our kids and This is our country. How about becoming your country and do that in your kids? Never going to happen. Never going to happen, mate. We won't do that. When we become your country, do that to your kids. We're going to beheaded.
You know,
these are our children. No, mate.
What are you teaching them kids? You're mouthing
All right, no.
Go on, say something about more kids. Go on.
The camera's rolling.
I don't care.
Just relax.
They're more kids.
Just relax.
Let's walk.
To avoid an escalation of the confrontation, I attempted to move Zahin away.
Are you okay?
Yeah. Because I'm used to this conflict.
No, but that's no one should be used to that.
It's, I mean, obviously the whole thing was shocking, but him saying I'm used to this kind of thing is because, I mean, that just seemed exceptionally, well, obviously completely racist, but also just so aggressive and out of nowhere. A woman working in a local bookshop witnessed the attack and Sky asked her for her views on it.
Have you ever seen anything like that?
No. Well, there have been protests. And of course, Warwickshire County Council's gone to reform. So I think it's given certain people a licence to be aggressive and to be racist.
So she's saying it's the election of reform to the county council, which has sort of made people feel emboldened to do this kind of thing. Warwickshire County Council is led by Reform UK's George Finch. He's just 19 years old. He gave this response to those comments from the bookshop employee.
Wow, to hear that actually is saddening, and I think what I've just heard is not the case at all. Reform, actually, and Nigel Farage as the leader, has done the most out of any political party, out of any person, to take down the far right, to protect young girls. They think that you going out protesting, that's racist. And that's the world going mad.
What do you think about that claim, Ash, that Nigel Farage has done more than anyone to put down the far right in this country?
I mean, so this is something that Nigel Farage loves to say. He likes to say, well, because I'm offering an electoral expression for anti-immigration sentiment, that means that I'm making far-right street movements less powerful. He also claims to be the reason why the BNP as an electoral force ran out of petrol. Now, I think that there's probably some truth to the BNP thing, although that was maybe going on a bit before Nigel Farage was in his ascendancy, the BNP were being wound down. But I don't think that this argument of, well, as long as the far right have a successful electoral expression, you're not going to have, a very disruptive, emboldened street movement. I mean, we can see this breaking down before our very eyes. I think that you also saw it, in the years following the 2016 Brexit result, that's also where you saw some of the largest far-right mobilizations for many years. And that was obviously a time where you had the Brexit Party riding high in the polls. You had a hard Brexit basically nailed on. I mean, yes, there was an impasse, but that's where the sort of head of steam was building. And you also had those massive far-right protests, particularly in Westminster. So as an analysis, that doesn't hold up. I mean, one of the things I guess I want to talk to you a bit, Michael, is about how is it you're supposed to make sense of all of these reports that are emerging of an increase in racial abuse, racial harassment, racial violence taking place across the country. I think one of the things that's really clear from a lot of the footage that you just shared, but also the footage that came out, I think about a week or two ago, of some young men in Essex painting St. George's crosses above a row of shops, and then when they saw a Muslim woman with her children, racially abusing them, calling them raggads, and so on and so forth. Is that, I think, from when you're seeing the footage, lots of these people are very drunk, possibly have had other substances as well. Some of them are quite young, but something which is shared across all of them is that there is this real sense of glee, they're just so pumped and full of adrenaline and kind of, I'm not saying high on substances, but sort of high off the feeling of, I get to transgress in this way. And I think that you've always had people who are like that. I think that even if immigration and asylum wasn't riding high in the headlines at the moment, those women that you saw accosting that guy during a Sky News interview, something tells me that they're not necessarily going to be the easiest people to live with in a general sense. The thing which does change, though, is to what extent do they feel emboldened by the context that they're in to say these particular things. And the change is, saying these things inside the house to outside the house, like inside, the context of immediate friends and family, to behaving like that in public. And that's where the mainstream context of, what's happening in the news agenda more broadly, what politicians are talking about, the protests and how those protests are framed, it really, really matters. It really, really matters, because whilst most people in this country, regardless of what they think about, specific bits of immigration policy, can look at that and go, I think that's disgusting. The fact is that they're behaving that way because in their head, they've got, as the owner of the bookshop said, the license, the permission, a sense that, what they're thinking and saying is being reflected by the mainstream or indeed people in power. And I'm not sure if you saw this on X recently, but Douglas Carswell, former UKIP MP, former Tory MP, who now lives in Mississippi, was posting tweets like, "From the river to the sea, let's make England Abdul free." And in a further tweet said, I've been advocating for the mass deportations of Muslims for a long time now. So when you're just saying mass deportations of Muslims, that British Muslims, that people like me, people like my mom, people like my family. I mean, it's hardcore, blood and soil, ethno-nationalist kind of stuff. And that's the thing, which is, we're in this moment where you've got a resurgent far-right street movement. I think that it's comparable to the 70s, the 80s, and the early 90s, when, you'd have the NF, you'd have a lot of racism on the streets. But it's also being reflected in mainstream parts of the political right as well. So far from Nigel Farage saying that the electoral far right is the best, bulwark against the street far right, we're seeing these two elements sort of feed one another and nurture one another.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically the country's been whipped up into a bit of a racist frenzy at the moment. I mean, it's interesting you brought up Brexit, because a lot of people thought that by voting for Brexit, that would increase anti-migrant sentiment. But actually, there's a whole debate about why it happened. But for a while, the opposite happened, because it felt like sort of the question had to some degree been answered. The newspapers started covering it less, and migration radically went down in salience, and also people became actively more positive about it. Sort of in opinion polls, if you said as migration brought more good than harm to the country, people were overwhelmingly saying more good, and that has shifted basically since Nigel Farage brought the country's attention to people coming over in small boats. I mean, to me, what seems like the most toxic thing is it seems like, well, do you want to say migration policies are liberal? I suppose migration is very high historically, but the rhetoric is all about how terrible it is. And that seems to me such a bad combination. You've got the government in question. So the number of people coming over in small boats is the most it's ever been. But the government overseeing that is saying that this is an existential threat to the country. So you're just whipping everyone up into a frenzy, saying this is a problem, not doing anything about it. And what that is also doing is justifying, I don't think morally justifying, but justifying in people's heads this idea that, well, you're all telling us this is bad, but you're not doing anything to stop it. And therefore, we're justified in taking matters into our own hands. And I think that's why we're in such a terribly dangerous situation. Let's move on to a slightly different part of this story, and then I'll come back to you, Ash, and you're free to disagree with me on anything I might have said there. But the uptick in racist violence around the country comes after a series of protests outside asylum hotels. There were more of them this weekend. These were the scenes in the Canada Square shopping centre in London's Canary Wharf. Now, if you're listening on the podcast, that clip showed a group of masked men and women draped in St. George's flags. They were surrounded by quite small children marching through the corridors of a shopping centre. That began as an anti-asylum protest, which the police say was peaceful. That was before the breakaway group entered the shopping centre. It was then that things soon turned violent. Now, according to police, the protesters inside the building became aggressive towards them, with one officer punched in the face. That resulted in one man being pinned down and pepper sprayed. Although not directly pepper sprayed, one of the children taken into the protest by their parent was affected by the gas, along with some members of the public. 4 people were arrested during that protest for offences including possession of drugs and assault. That protest came in the wake of a court decision over the Bell Hotel in the London suburb of Epping. Now, on Friday, the Court of Appeal overturned a temporary injunction that would have closed the hotel, meaning asylum seekers will now not be moved away from it. The appeal was lodged by the Home Office. In response to the ruling, Nigel Farage posted this. The government has used ECHR against the people of Epping, so that's the European Convention on Human Rights. Illegal migrants have more rights than the British people under Starmer. The claim about illegal migrants having more rights than the British people is obviously ridiculous. The idea that this was because of the ECHR is also misleading. So the government did consider citing the European Convention on Human Rights as evidence that the injunction on housing asylum seekers in the Bell Hotel should be overturned. The government actually dropped that argument, and in the end, the judge simply decided that given there will be a hearing for a permanent injunction to close the hotel in October, the appeals court didn't think it was reasonable to preempt that and close it now with a temporary injunction. So they just wait for the proper decision to come. Of course, Labour has no interest as being seen as defenders of asylum hotels or migrants more generally. They've been very clear about that. And Yvette Cooper has today continued her crusade to look tough on immigration.
We're bringing forward new immigration rules this week to temporarily suspend new applications under the existing dedicated refugee family reunion route. Until the new framework is introduced, refugees will be covered by the same family migration rules and conditions as everyone else.
So at the moment, people granted refugee status in the UK can apply for expedited visas for their immediate family, meaning partners and children. Last year, the government awarded 25,000 family reunion visas, which was nearly twice as many as the 12,000 awarded in the previous year. The government says the increase is a result of Labour speeding up visa assessments. Cooper also said this about asylum hotels.
Mr. Speaker, I understand and agree with local councils and communities who want the asylum hotels in their communities closed, because we need to close all asylum hotels, and we need to do so for good. But that must be done in a controlled and orderly manner, and not through a return to the previous government's chaos that led to the opening of hotels in the first place.
Now, so that was sort of her just reiterating the government position there. It's the thing on family reunions that seems to be the new policy here. So they're pausing expedited family reunions for asylum seekers or people who've been granted asylum. I presume the reason it's expedited is because the family of a person who's been granted refugee status is very likely to be in a place where they're at risk. So if the person has fled a civil war, for example, or is being politically persecuted, then you probably don't want to wait too long before their family can come over here because they might be at risk in the meantime. So I assume that's why it was expedited in the first place, and Yvette Cooper's going to have to answer why that no longer matters or why that logic no longer holds. Ash, I suppose Labour's response to migration being the national obsession at the moment is to keep making minor changes to make the migration system slightly tougher. Where's this going? How's the strategy working out for them? And I suppose not just for them, for the country, for people of colour, for migrants, for everyone.
So I think the first thing that I'd like to point out is that every time a government, whether it's the new Labour government in the early 2000s or the various iterations of the Tory party, which followed post-2010, or this Labour government, every time they try and do an anti-asylum crackdown and introduce new policies, what they effectively do is plant the seeds of some kind of future crisis. And I think you can see this go all the way along. So when you've got legislation brought in saying that asylum seekers aren't allowed to work, they're going to have no recourse to public funds, they're going to have relatively a small amount of money provided through the benefit system per week. What that does is that it creates, this, relatively large pool of, unregulated labour. So when you do see the problem of, for instance, asylum seekers riding for Deliveroo or Uber Eats or Just Eat, that's because that's the only way they can make some money. And I don't know if you know this, Michael, but there's actually a fairly large secondary market in Uber Eats and Deliveroo and Just Eat accounts. So if you're someone with the legal right to work, you can actually make a decent amount of money, and it's certainly a lot less physically taxing to do this. You rent out your account to someone who doesn't have the right to work here, and that's basically a product of the Blair era legislation that says we're not going to allow asylum seekers to work. We've talked about the way in which the asylum hotels, it's a politician-made crisis. It's a product of the fact that we said, okay, we're not going to try and house people in the community. All right. In terms of the Tory government, we're going to really, really drag our feet and create an asylum backlog. We're going to create this sort of hyper-visible crisis. And also, we're going to use hotels, many of which are in more deprived parts of the country. Obviously, that's not relevant for Canary Wharf, but that is, really important for thinking about, say, the kinds of sites that we unfortunately saw, not the summer just gone, but the one before following the Southport stabbings. That's a government manufactured crisis. And similarly, the lack of safe and legal routes through which people can, as entire families, as intact families, seek asylum together. And the fact that we said, okay, we're not going to have those routes, or it's only going to be open for a very, very limited number of people and countries. That means, of course, you're going to see more young men crossing the channel in small boats, because that's also the kind of dangerous crossing where people don't send their elderly parents or their pregnant wives or their kids to do that. That's why you see normally fit younger men making that kind of crossing. And I think that when it comes to saying, okay, we're going to make it even harder to have family reunification, I do think that's going to make a lot of the kinds of problems that we've seen worse. And this is the thing about asylum hotels, is that it is a completely indefensible system. So this is where the anti-asylum side politically have the upper hand, because it forces people who are saying, actually, we really object to this demonization of migrants and asylum seekers, forces them into the position of defending a completely indefensible and an unworkable system. And I think one element of it, which is really bad, is that in many of these asylum hotels, and this is part of the story that many of the protesters tell, is that they're like, hang on, there's just loads of men here, like loads of men here. They've got nothing to do because they've not been allowed to work. They just hang around all day. Even if they're not committing crimes or doing harm, this is something which makes me feel really unsafe. And also something which I can believe that when you've got lots of men, so many of whom will have been very troubled themselves, lots of men in any one place and not very many women, like you tend not to see those men behaving well. All right. And that's not anything to do with, nationality or culture or whatever. I kind of think that's the case in every single culture across the world. And so I think if you say, all right, we're going to make it much harder for people to bring, their wives and kids here, I think it makes all of those divisions and, really toxic dynamics worse. I really do believe that.
I mean, the migration system does seem to me to be a bit of a mess, because you've got the Refugee Convention, which basically means that if you arrive in a place, it's quite difficult to get rid of you if you're from a really violent, dangerous place. So if you're from Eritrea, or if you're from Sudan, or if you're from wherever, the governments in the West don't want to sort of take that many people. So what they do is pay people in Libya, pay people in Turkey, or governments, to try and stop them, to try and round them up, to try and put them in detention centers, and then try and make it as unattractive as possible to come here versus, say, France or Germany or whatever. So there's this sort of weird competition to make life really, really difficult for asylum seekers, but then also saying you don't want to come here, you shouldn't come here, the worst thing you can possibly do is come here, but also if you come here, you get a right to stay. And I think that whether or not you make family reunion difficult, that's always going to favor young men who are going to find it easier to cross continents, because you've got a system which is basically saying you have to come here irregularly. And if you manage to get here irregularly and you're from a dangerous enough place, you probably will be able to stay. It does seem like a system that isn't really set up to work very well. Ash, I don't know what you think about that, and also and where you think this is going. Because obviously, sort of the left-wing argument is to say, well, if we had safe routes, this would stop. I think safe routes are a good idea, but I don't think safe routes would stop the boats, because unless the safe routes gave places to everyone who wanted one, or to all the people who have the wherewithal to cross Europe and try and cross the Channel, you'll be giving people safe routes, and there'll still be a small boats crisis, which makes it kind of politically difficult. So I don't know if you think, to me, there's no easy answers here. I mean, I think what the government should definitely do is stop whipping up a racist frenzy. I mean, that's simple. The political question is kind of simple in a way. The policy question, to me, I haven't really heard a particularly persuasive answer that I think would look acceptable to everyone.
I mean, you've also got the element which is, no matter how difficult you make it here in this country, it's never going to be as difficult as the place where there's war, there's persecution, there's there's arbitrary arrest and detention and torture. I mean, so that's the other thing, which is they're like, okay, we're going to make it really, really difficult, make life really difficult for these male asylum seekers. But it's like, okay, well, there's torture on the other side over there, so that's fine. I can deal with this thing. Obviously that we've seen this with, for example, unaccompanied minors. There are some really high rates of mental health issues, attempted suicide and suicide, but ultimately the conditions you have here are not going to be worse than the ones that they fled. I mean, personally, I think that a system which prioritizes whole and intact families is probably much better. And I think that that's one thing that, if we have an asylum system, who do we want to prioritize? Whole and intact families, I think, is something which is, probably better for when you're thinking about, okay, how do you integrate large volumes of people into a different culture and really different norms? I think whole and intact families probably much better. And then I think there's another dimension to this which is really worth talking about, which is the same way we on the left talk about, and I'm not drawing a moral equivalence here, but I'm just talking about trying to understand what's going on in someone else's political story. Same way we on the left will say, okay, there's a clear democratic mandate for these things and they never happen. There's also been, in election after election after election, a clearly expressed desire to have less immigration in this country. And what we've seen is historically high amounts of immigration. And I think that there is a left-wing analysis of this. Like, this is something we have to be able to talk about, which is one of the reasons why the government has done this, is because without adding more people to the economy, they'd be in recession. So they don't have an economic model. We've got low productivity, like we've got no growth. And that's because we've got this fucking parasitic rentier system where people are able to, extract a lot more money from the economy than their contribution warrants. I think that's why we've got a low growth, low productivity economy. And the way that governments have to deal with that, because they've said, okay, well, we can't tackle that. That's the realm of the markets. Our job is to facilitate that process. They've gone, okay, let's add people to the economy in the form of immigration. And that is a form of democratic betrayal if you're someone who's like, but that's literally not what I voted Brexit for, or not what I voted for this party for, or whatever. And I think that, again, if we're on the left want to think seriously about these protests and where they're coming from and the rise of anti-immigrant sentiment in this country, that's something that you have to grapple with.
The British far right is not famous for consistency. The anti-immigration movement has presented itself as defending women. Yet in June this year, The Guardian reported that 2 in 5 of those arrested at last summer's far-right riots had been reported for domestic abuse. That's a depressing statistic, which shows you just how seriously you should take far-right protesters suddenly claiming to be passionate about women's safety. A new report, though, has shown far-right hypocrisy on a more surreal level, let's say. Because it turns out that one of the key figures behind the protests against irregular migration across the Channel has himself been convicted for illegally smuggling migrants across the Channel. The man in question, called Lee Twomley, pictured here leading a Britain First march through Manchester earlier this summer. And Hope Not Hate wrote this. So they say, we can reveal that Twomley was previously jailed for 20 months as part of a Salford gang that tried to smuggle 11 Vietnamese migrants across the Channel to pay off drug debts. The gang made 2 bungled attempts to smuggle 8 men, 2 women and a child across the Eurotunnel in hire vans and were caught after failing to get insurance to drive in France. Twomley pleaded guilty alongside 4 others in 2016, the defendants receiving a combined total of 7 years and 8 months behind bars for their crimes. Now, it's not, in a way, this is a funny story. There are so few people who've been convicted of smuggling migrants, and there are so few people who lead far-right anti-migrant movements in this country. It just seems so surprising that someone is in the middle of the Venn diagram where they're both of them. But this guy is. Lee Twomley has appeared in another investigation this weekend. The Manchester Mill has reported that Twomley is one of the leaders behind the movement to raise England flags and Union Jacks around Manchester. Again, this is a movement ostensibly against illegal immigration, which is being led by a man convicted of illegally smuggling migrants. Earlier today, I spoke to the author of that piece in the Manchester Mill, Jack Walton, and I asked him how he connected Twomley to the Raise the Flag movement in Manchester.
We obviously noticed that flags were going up all around Salford first. Oh, as I say this, Lee Twomley's just texted me, actually. But we noticed that flags were going up all around Salford, and then on Wednesday last week, they appeared in the city centre all around Manchester, mostly Piccadilly Gardens. We were sort of searching around on sort of TikTok, online socials, that sort of thing, for who was doing it. There was an account called Salford T-Bone, which appeared to be the kind of main person sharing videos of them all putting it up with the kind of weird far-right AI music backgrounds going on. I found his Facebook page, and he only had about 6 friends on there, so we just looked up all of them. One of them was Lee Twomley, who looks remarkably similar to Salford T-Bone, and as it turns out, as you mentioned a minute ago, there was a Hope Not Hate article from only about a couple of weeks ago, where Lee Twomley had been at the front of the Britain First march for remigration in Manchester. And they'd linked that back to an incident in 2016, which was when he was convicted of smuggling, or attempting to smuggle, I should say, 4 Vietnamese migrants into the country. And that was the process. Basically, it was obvious that they were one and the same.
What's your understanding of why? I don't know if it's the case everywhere, but why the people behind the Raise the Flags movement in Manchester, I suppose, wanted to remain anonymous or at least pseudonymous? Is it because Lee Twomley has this embarrassing background and sort of didn't want the two connected, or is that sort of part of the strategy with the Raise the Flags to make it somewhat anonymous? Because I suppose your reporting, what you basically did was connect a fake profile with a real person. But why was there a fake profile in the first place?
You could certainly guess that Lee Twamley is embarrassed about the contradiction between his sort of current political motivations and his past. When I spoke to another member of their group, a woman called Emma, she was sort of trying to brush all of that off as, you know, completely irrelevant connection and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I suppose I don't know for absolute certainty why they're trying to sort of remain vaguely anonymous. I mean, they've also got like members of organised sort of far right groups, like Britain First co-leader Ashley Simon was one of their little troop going around putting the flags up. I suppose maybe they also benefit from the idea that people might have that it's sort of ordinary, as they would say, ordinary fed up Britons, you know, kind of standing up, as opposed to sort of links to organised far right groups, which makes it look a lot murkier.
So it wasn't just this prior conviction for illegally smuggling migrants, which, I mean, you can't make it up. There's a video of him appearing to slap a woman. Well, not appear. I mean, he does slap a woman. The recent Britain First protest. So it sort of looked like she was trying to knock a camera out of his hand, and then he responded by slapping her. My understanding is you've put that to him. You said sort of at the very beginning of this interview, you're still getting messages from Lee Twamley. What's he saying? What's his responses to what you're putting to him?
I spent most of Friday last week trying to get hold of him, including going to an address that I thought was his. Eventually, he kind of got in touch with us via text, and we put a series of allegations to him, including, the contradiction between his prior convictions and his current antics, and that incident that you described there in Piccadilly Gardens, where he's slapped a woman in the face. To which he responded only "old news" was his 2-word response. But after the piece kind of came out, we've had a lot more from him over the weekend. I've had a sort of series of sort of mildly threatening voicemail messages from Mr. Twamley, which I probably can't repeat on your show. But yeah, he's been more vocal since than before the piece.
Well, he's a man with a criminal past, I suppose. Your article was a bit of a broader report as well, wasn't it, on the Raise the Flags movement in Manchester? You sort of talked to people around the city, what they thought of it. And I suppose there is, I mean, you've intimated towards it before, but there is a sort of big public debate going on about whether this is a sort of bottom-up movement by ordinary Brits who are sort of fed up of Britishness being denigrated or not properly celebrated, and it being something which is basically the creation of the organised far right. I suppose the Lee Twamley connection here suggests the latter. Did you discover anything to suggest that the former also does have something to do with it? Did you see a sort of, when you're walking around town talking to people, investigating who's doing this, did you also see sort of ordinary fed up residents who felt proud of the flag?
I spoke to a lot of residents who sort of suspected that that's what it was, who would have suspected that the people putting these flags up were just, as you say, ordinary fed up residents who wouldn't have necessarily expected or assumed that there would be an organised far right connection, and whose opinions tended to be kind of indifferent. Not like there wasn't so much like massive. We're massively proud. This is a wonderful thing, except from a couple of right wing councillors who you'd kind of expect that kind of thing from. But no, there wasn't a lot of like this is highly concerning. This is obviously the far right out on our streets hanging flags either. I'd say the kind of main kind of emotion that we got back when I went round on Wednesday afternoon in Salford was kind of indifference, and not like, as I say, not like a kind of this is obviously the work of the far right, the hand of the far right. But when you look into these things, it's you're never surprised to find that is what it is a lot of the time.
Finally, I suppose, is indifference the right word? I suppose you spoke to members of Manchester Council, it's obviously Labour controlled, and they've, I suppose, decided not really to react to these flags being put up. At least at the time that you published the article, they weren't bringing them down. And my understanding from the councillors you quoted is that they thought that would play into the hands of the far right, because then they could say, oh, the England flag is being censored, and that would become a call to arms. So I suppose could you talk about that? What is the council's strategy? Are they just going to leave up the flags indefinitely?
Yeah, I don't think it's absolutely clear. I mean, because the councillor is only one councillor who came out on the radio the morning after they went up, a guy called Pat Carney. It's a sort of long-time Manchester councillor who came out and said that they'll stay up. It would be a mistake to take them down. I think they've kind of seen what had happened in Birmingham, where it's all swelled out of Birmingham and it's become a kind of culture war point, I guess you'd say. And they kind of felt that if they go down that line, it would embolden them. It would allow them to make the argument that Manchester City Council is unpatriotic and hates the sight of the flag in public spaces, etc., etc. So they felt it was the wiser strategy, at least at first, to leave them in place. I don't know what they'll do eventually. I mean, I suppose a lot of them are quite like cheap flags. I suppose like they'll get pretty tatty and battered, and eventually they'll be able to use that justification to take them down. But I think they just think was for the time being, it makes sense to not make a huge thing of it and just leave it and to not play into their hands, as it were.
That was Jack Walton from Manchester Mill speaking to me earlier. I'm going to go to Ash in one moment for her views on the England flags and Union Jacks being put up around the country. First, though, let's hear the view of our Prime Minister.
I'm a supporter of flags.
You are sitting with one. You've got a Union Jack behind you.
I've got one behind me. Are you
a supporter of people painting roundabouts and hanging them from lampposts?
Look, I'm the leader of the Labour Party who put the Union Jack on our Labour Party membership cards. I always sit in front of a Union Jack. I've been doing it for years, and it attracted a lot of comment when I started doing it. And in our flat, which is upstairs from here, as you know, we've got the St George's flag in our flat.
So you're encouraging people to put up more flags?
I'm very encouraging of flags. I think they're patriotic, and I think they're a great symbol of our nation. I don't think they should be devalued and belittled, and I think sometimes when they're used purely for divisive purposes, it actually devalues the flag. I don't want to see that. I'm proud of our flag. I sit in front of our flag, and I'm very, very proud to do so.
I'm a supporter of flags is such a Keir Starmer statement because it means absolutely nothing. Ash, I mean, you can comment on Keir Starmer, you can comment on the broader Raise the Flags movement. How are you relating to all of this?
I'm a supporter of flags. I'm a lover of lamp. I mean, it's just, can he not talk like a normal person? I mean, he just comes across like a badly programmed AI a lot of the time. But he's not unique to this. I mean, I remember when, this would have been 2014, 2015, something like that, when Ed Miliband was asked about how he felt when he saw a white van with an England flag on it. He went, well, I feel a tremendous amount of respect. How politicians respond when they're being asked to sort of reply to these completely fatuous questions is astonishing. It's like they've never heard another human being speak before. I mean, it really is a masterclass in Starmerism there, because you do actually have a substantive issue there, which is, regardless of what you think about flags being displayed, do you agree with people, breaking the law? So, graffiti, defacement, and using the flag in order to intimidate racial minorities. I mean, this is the easiest question for a supposedly Labour Prime Minister to answer, because then what you do is you say, well, to me, the flag means this. You make a case for inclusivity and, the fact that we are a multi-ethnic democracy, that, England and the UK is this rich tradition of tolerance, blah, 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 blah. And when people use it for the purposes of intimidation, that's absolutely not who we are. Instead, it was, when you see it used for divisive purposes, I think that actually devalues the flag. I mean, it's just so contentless. As for I'm a supporter of flags. I've got a St George's flag in my house. I mean, I think most people don't do that. And that's fine. It doesn't mean that they don't like this country. It doesn't mean that they won't, get out England flag bunting during the Euros or the World Cup or something. I think most people don't do that. And I think this is the thing about sort of, and the far right have understood this very well, is that it's very easy to manufacture media stories, particularly around flags, and you get people to move the dial on what's normal. It's not really normal in this country to display national flags all the time. I mean, you might think that it should be, and that's fine. That's your opinion, but that's not the norm in this country. It's much more the norm in a place like America. I'd also say that we have a lot less visibility for, our national flags in this country compared to European countries where, your average post office has got your regional flag, your national flag, and the EU flag, fluttering all together. Again, you can have an argument about that, or a discussion about, well, maybe we should be more like that. Maybe we should fly, city flags, regional flags, national flags, from municipal buildings. That's fine. But there's something really specific and particular that's going on right now, which is that it's not a discussion about, yes, we want to see flags displayed from civic buildings. It's coming within this context of a campaign of intimidation against asylum seekers, and it's being used specifically to try and intimidate people of color in this country. I mean, when someone's breaking into a mosque and they're spray painting a St. George's cross, they're not doing that out of love of country. They're not doing it because they would actually really prefer it if their town hall flew a St. George's cross. They're doing it because it's a part of racist intimidation. And I think that any prime minister, regardless of whether they're Labour or not, I think a Tory prime minister, a reasonable political expectation would be for them to condemn the use of the flag for the purposes of racist intimidation. And I think it is so telling of Keir Starmer's lack of backbone and lack of political instinct that he's unable to do that.
I suppose why this was sort of, in a way, a smart campaign by the far right is because it's often ambiguous whether or not the flag is being used as a symbol of racist intimidation. So obviously, in a situation where someone's broken into a mosque and sprayed it on the wall, or someone sprayed a Chinese takeaway, or I've read reports of sort of the flag appearing outside the only black family on a street or whatever, it is clear. But I suppose for him, he's thinking the question of, is it, because in a way they want him to call the flag racist so that then they can whip up a whole, I think universally the issue with Keir Starmer is any answer he gives is always unconvincing because he's a deeply unconvincing person who doesn't sound barely human. But I can see why lots of people are finding, are reluctant to sort of, in a broad sweeping way, say the flags are being used as a method of racial intimidation because then it's ambiguous to argue which are and which aren't. I suppose, what would you say to that?
I think that, so firstly, I think that when you've got people putting it up in the context is these anti-asylum protests, those things are linked. I've got no problem with people making the flag more visible in general. I actually think, though, if we did that, it wouldn't satisfy what people are really feeling the loss of, which is, I think, particularly in England. And so England is being distinct from Wales and from Scotland. And of course, Ireland is its own political context. But particularly in England, we just gleefully gutted our sense of English culture. And I think that's because we really, really embraced sort of Americanism, and we destroyed so many of our gorgeous city and town centres, replaced it with car parks, replaced it with dual carriageways, replaced it with, multi-screen cinemas and the Hollywood Bowl. And we feel that sort of loss of, an English culture that anyone can participate in. And when you compare, English high streets to high streets in other European countries, we've got far fewer sort of, what you might call a mom and pop shop, sort of family owned and family run businesses and shops where you don't have, the biggest client base in the world, but you can sell your little thing. And whenever you go on holiday in Europe, you go, oh my God, I can't believe it. There's a shop which is only selling taps and it's somehow not part of a chain. We've been really, really, really bad at protecting those things. And we've just handed it over to the global landlord class. So I also think that if you had a heightened visibility of the St. George's Cross or the Union Jack, that's not enough to create a national culture. We gave that away to American-style capitalism.
I think it's a very good point. But, you say in the European cities, they have flags outside the post office. They often have very beautiful post offices, which are run by the state, whereas ours have all been sold off, and now the post offices are just in the back of a shop, where it looked rather odd to have a massive Union Jack outside your local corner shop, which is where most post offices are now. A new Gaza flotilla set sail from Barcelona to try and break the siege on Gaza on Sunday. And we didn't get far, though, after bad weather forced it to turn back. But we understand they'll be setting sail again this evening. And now this is the third attempt by volunteers to deliver aid to Gaza while Palestinians continue to starve to death under Israel's control. But this time it's bigger than ever, when the first tranche of ships making up the Sumud flotilla depart Barcelona for a second time. They'll be carrying around 100 volunteers. Sumud, which is an Arabic word meaning resilience, is expected to reach Gaza around the 10th of September. Along the way, the flotilla will grow. As the flotilla travels eastwards towards Palestine, it'll be joined by more ships currently preparing for the voyage in Tunisia, including some from Asia. In total, more than 50 ships will join the effort to break the siege, carrying delegations from 44 countries. Climate activist Greta Thunberg is on board for a second time. You can watch our interview with her on Novara Media's YouTube channel now. And joining her are two familiar faces to Novara viewers, Novara Media contributors Tai Kiki and Kieran Andreu. Novara Media caught up with them ahead of the flotilla's launch in Barcelona.
I really feel like we're living through a period of history that's going to change everything. Aside from the horrors that we've all witnessed, aside from the fact that I have got numerous, at this point, Palestinian friends, and I mean proper friends that I love. I've got Palestinian friends in Cork that I'm bringing up my kids around and have a relationship with my daughters, and I can feel a tiny bit of their pain, and then I feel like it's incumbent on me to do something as their buddy when I have a little bit of a platform. But I think the main reason, though, is I don't frame it that I'm kind of like leaving my kids and that it's selfish. Of course, it's selfish that other people are going to worry about you and that they're going to feel, they're just going to hope you come back in one piece, and I get all that. But I'm really looking at trying to give my kids an example that there is no hierarchy of human being, that the fact that people are being slaughtered and starved to death in Gaza right now, they're no more important, those children are no more important than my children.
First of all, I am on the trip as a journalist reporting on what's happening.
Yeah.
At the same time, as an animating force behind what I'm doing is definitely the fact that my dad's family are Palestinian, that they all live in East Jerusalem, most of them anyway, the vast majority, that my brothers, sisters and so on have lived under Zionist occupation their entire lives.
Yeah.
And that leaves the mark of violence on them in the varied ways that it does, right? So intergenerational trauma. So my grandfather shot during the Nakba, my uncle imprisoned, tortured, eventually killed. My generation, my brother locked up at 12 years old for throwing stones during the Second Intifada at tanks. And, though that's the animating spirit, that's the animating force for me wanting to come and, be part of this, as well as, of course, the, wanting to actually just record what's happening and why we're doing it and so on, and conveying it to people at home. And like you said, I think the humanitarian corridor aspect of this is so vital, right? It's like, we open up a corridor, it acts as a conduit for people to rush in after us.
Yeah.
This has to be a continuous process. We're not doing this as a one-off. It would be valuable, in itself as a sort of symbolic thing, but ultimately what we want to do is kind of act as a Trojan horse, if you like.
Yes.
In a totally non-military way, in a totally peaceful humanitarian way, but act as a Trojan horse to open up the space for others to continue using that humanitarian corridor to eventually smash the siege.
That was Tai Kiki and Kieran Andreu. And perhaps more surprisingly, there are also 9 US military veterans aboard the flotilla. So US Army veteran Greg Stoker explained why he was taking part.
We are going with a boat of 9 veterans, and trying to leverage the militarization of the society and veteran worship, which is on the decline, but it's still, people, at least politicians, like to put us on a pedestal and pretend like they actually care, which they don't. But there's a lot of public pressure that we can leverage because of our social and cultural capital within American society. We're going as a singular boat to represent that part of our culture and leverage what we can. 9 veterans from different backgrounds, different branches of service. And we have a domestic support put in place if we get put into detention, that a lot of our state representatives are going to be hearing from a lot of local organizers and groups, and we're going to do what we can to spread that message.
One of the flotilla's organisers is Yasmin Akar, and she described the philosophy behind the voyage.
Our goal, first and foremost, is to bring the attention to Gaza, obviously, because the Zionist entity is really good at diverging attention. When it happened with the Madeleine, they suddenly attacked Iran, and everyone forgot. And there were, of course, other things happening too. The Sumut convoy, the global march to Gaza, and that was probably quite scary for the Zionist entity. So we are trying to center Gaza in everything that we do, and we're sending a message to our governments. Again, as I said, they don't speak for us. And we don't stand for them for what they do, the killings, the breach of international law, the crimes against humanity, and this never again that they claim to, never again. But never again for who? Is the never again only for European white people, or is it for everyone? We carry no weapons. We only carry humanitarian aid. And once we open up the humanitarian sea corridor, we will make a call out to the world. And we are already preparing next missions. We are already preparing boats that will come after us. We just need to open up the sea corridor.
That was Yasmin Akar. You'll remember that earlier in the summer, British band Bob Vylan caused a storm at Glastonbury after chanting death to the IDF. Now, one of their members, Bobby Vylan, isn't travelling on the flotilla, but he was in Barcelona to see the volunteers off.
Why is it on people around the world to organise this and deliver the humanitarian aid? Why? That's a failing of the British government, right? And governments around the world. Why is it on the people to do what the government should have been doing? Why is it on the people to shut down weapons factories operating on British soil? That is something that the British government should be doing and should have done a long time ago. We know that those factories are contributing to the genocide and the slaughter of Palestinian people in the tens of thousands. Why is it on the people to shut those places down? The British government is not doing enough. It is doing nothing, and that is a stain on yet another stain on the history of Britain and the history of British politics.
There'll be lots more content going out on the Novara Media YouTube from that flotilla and interviews with people who'll be on it. Lots of love in the comments for Tig and Kieran especially, which is great to see. And we'll be giving you regular updates about the flotilla. We're going to end there. It's been an hour, but if you want to hear more of Ash's excellent analysis, and who doesn't, why not join the thousands who already get it straight to their inbox every week? Ash's weekly newsletter, the Cortado, gets delivered every Friday morning. So if you feel you could do with even more A-grade analysis of the most important stories of the week, just sign up. You can do that by going to novaramedia.com/newsletters. The link is also in the description below. Ash, before I let you go, why should people sign up to the Cortado?
You should sign up to the Cortado because it's free. I wake up very early in order to write it. And thirdly, and most importantly, I actually spend a really long time trying to think about the stupidest possible pun that I could put in the title. So yes, political analysis, yada, yada, yada. Yes, it's a reflection on things that maybe I don't get to chat about on the Monday Novara Live. And, the topics are really different from Downstream or If I Speak, blah, 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 blah. Subscribe for the puns.
The puns are good. The analysis is good, but the puns are really good. Definitely do subscribe. It's also nice and short. Like, I do read it every week without fail. Thank you for joining me, Ash. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And we'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.